Good morning, it's Jeff Christian. It's the 11th of December in New York City and elsewhere. Um, on the screen, we have a trade recommendation that we did for gold on Wednesday. And our recommendation, these recommendations are for investors who tend to buy and sell with a 1 to 10 day horizon. So it's like, what do we think is going to happen in the next 5 to 10 days? And the direction that we posted on Wednesday was stand aside. Our view was divided. We have a committee of 3 people at present who really work on our views of any given market, at least in the precious metals and base metals. And we try to reach a consensus. And usually we do reach a consensus. It's sort of like the Federal Reserve Board's Open Market Committee, or even the Supreme Court. You try to reach a consensus. And sometimes you can't reach a consensus, so you reach a majority. And what happened on Wednesday was that one of our members was thinking that the price of gold, which was around 1850, well, what was it? It was 1850 at the time, 1849.50. One of our members thought that it would probably rise to 1880. Another member thought that it could probably fall to 1820 or maybe even 1800 or maybe even 1780. And the third one thought that it would probably tread water for the next several days before finding a direction. And the consensus that we reached was that that range of 1820 to 1880 was a reasonable range, and it was plus or minus $30 from where we were at the time that we were discussing our short-term outlook for the market. So the view was stand aside. And if you see 1880, you probably want to sell some gold on a short-term basis. And if you see 1820, you probably want to buy some gold on a short-term basis. And that's why that was there. So we try to reach a consensus. And when our consensus is that we really don't see a clear direction, plus or minus 30% risk reward ratio of 1 to 1, stand aside and wait until you see something clearer. Now, that was Wednesday. On Thursday, we issued our December Precious Metals Advisory, which is available for purchase on our website, cpmgroup.com. And the title was No Reason to Be Overly Optimistic. That's lifted from a song called 1921 that The Who had at the beginning of the rock opera Tommy in 1971, I believe it was, 1970, end of 1970. And it's a theme that we have held for about 6 months. And that's that the change of calendar from 2020 to 2021 is a human artifice. It really means nothing to the broader trends. And there are a lot of people who have suffered mightily in 2020, and they're looking forward to 2021 with great optimism that 2021 will be better. And our view is, well, yeah, it may be better, but let's be realistic. All of the trends that have caused so much pain and agony in 2020 will be there on January 1st, 2021 and beyond. Changing the calendar doesn't change reality. The pandemic will still be there, and it'll be worse than it is today, globally, and in the United States and in Europe. The economic recession and associated economic and financial market problems will still be there next year. And the political dysfunctionality, not only in the United States, but also in the United Kingdom and in the European Union and around the world and other countries, all of that political dysfunctionality will still be there. Things might get better. We may have a more rational government in the United States, but it's not going to be a good one. We may have greater political cooperation among countries, but it's going to be very tentative and hesitant, and it's still going to be limited by the distrust and distaste that has been generated not only over the last 40 years, over the last 40 years between the United States and various countries around the world. Right now, we saw the gold price spike lower earlier this week. There's a lot of optimism in there, and we think that some of that optimism will fade. There's vaccine optimism. we've said repeatedly, we've quoted an FDA official who said vaccines don't stop the virus, vaccinations do. And that's the reality. If people don't get the vaccinations, it won't help stop the pandemic. If people do get the vaccinations, it's going to take 6 months. I mean, in the United States, we think that maybe we'll have a third of the population vaccinated by April. And you need about 2/3 of the population to be vaccinated to really start to control the spread of the virus. And only half of the population says they want to get the vaccine. So if only half of the population in the United States get the vaccine, it doesn't help the broader pandemic become an epidemic, but you still have a number of people who will be getting sick and dying. Of course, if some of those people who say they're not going to get the vaccine, who say that the pandemic and the viruses are hoax, maybe if people around them start dying in greater numbers, they might decide to get the vaccine. But if you look at the lack of information, the lack of the ability to think well and clearly, and the amount of delusion and self-delusion that is being professed across important topics in the world, it's highly unlikely that these people will change their views even if their loved ones die. You know, we've had nurses report repeatedly about people on their deathbed from COVID-19 saying, COVID-19 doesn't exist, I must have lung cancer. So the ability to fool oneself is enormous. And it has to do with the pandemic, it has to do with economics, it has to do with politics, it has to do with a lot of other things. So it's something to worry about. But right now we've had a little bit of vaccine optimism. I think that's going to be followed by vaccination realism over the next 3 months, could start tomorrow. We have Brexit realism that's going to set in. The Electoral College is set to vote Monday. Everybody's waiting to see what the Supreme Court's going to do with this Texas lawsuit against the 4 battleground states. That throws greater uncertainty. There is a great deal of optimism that the Electoral College will do its job and the Supreme Court will do its job, and Biden will be the president-elect. He'll be sworn in late January. But none of that's really going to solve the political stalemate in Washington. If you look at the way Mitch McConnell has handled both the budget appropriations bill, which is dead in the Senate right now and could lead to the US government shutting down tonight, Friday night. If you look at the way he's backed off of saying that he was willing to compromise on the next stimulus package, you can understand this is a Mitch McConnell and Republicans in the Senate fighting for their political survival. If he actually acts in a responsible fashion and cooperates with his opposition in Congress, he loses. It's his political career. He has staked his political career on being an honorary fool who refuses to cooperate with anybody who disagrees with him and to stalemate the government. And going into a new period of time with a new, probably Democratic administration, he has everything personally to gain by continuing to stalemate the government and nothing to lose. He has everything to lose if he tries to do his job in an ethical and responsible and intelligent fashion. And he knows that. He hasn't gotten to where he is not knowing that. So there's Electoral College optimism right now. There's optimism that we might see a more rational government in the United States. But the reality is that even though we may see a more rational government, we're not going to see a particularly effective one. And it's going to take time to even know that. Our expectation is that the Republicans will retain control of the Senate even after the January 5th runoff elections in Georgia. Although, on the one hand, it's the Republicans' elections to lose. We don't think the Democrats have the capacity to win. They certainly don't seem to be campaigning effectively. But we have to wait and see until January 5th, January 6th to see how that is. You also have congressmen on the Republican side who want to try to create a floor fight on January 6th when the Congress is supposed to accept the Electoral College vote. And, you know, the way the system is set up, they're supposed to accept the Electoral College vote. But there are Republicans who say they want to argue against that and invalidate the election on January 6th. So even if the Supreme Court today comes out and says, hey, there's no standing for Texas, this is nonsense, get out of here, ending the Supreme Court challenges, you still have to wait until January 6th to see what the Republicans do in terms of trying to subvert the way the government works on the floor of the House. So there's political realism that's going to set in, and then there's going to be economic realism that sets in. There's no reason for excessive optimism looking at next year. There's reason to expect that things might get better and might get better as the year progresses. It's not going to happen on January 1st or January 2nd. It's going to take a lot of time, and it's going to take a level of ethics and intelligence on the part of leaders around the world that we don't necessarily have. I've talked about the US. It is still the largest economy, and it is a country that people look at, and it is the producer of the US dollar, which represents 75% of private financial wealth and 62% of foreign exchange wealth held by central banks. I mentioned Britain and Brexit, which looks like it's going to a new deal, a no deal Brexit this weekend. That's going to cause problems in Europe. Within Europe, you have a post-Brexit re-examination of what the role of the EU is in Europe. There are any number of countries, including France, that are saying, listen, we really need to regain our political sovereignty away from the European Union. That's going to be an issue that's going to confound cooperation in Europe next year. You have Russia, enough said there. And China has its own issues, from Hong Kong and Taiwan to its own backyard and front yard. So I think there are a lot of issues that will be worrisome in 2021 and beyond. And that concern is going to be reflected in stronger investment demand for gold and silver. We've seen investors buy more than double the amount of gold that they bought in 2017, 2018, 2019, in 2020. Investment demand is more than double this year than it was in the year before. And that's been reflected in the gold price, which has gone from $1,200 to $2,000 and is currently around $1,850. You've seen silver prices rise even more forcefully. And we think that investment demand for gold and silver, because of these political, economic, and public health issues, will continue to be very strong next year. And that'll be reflected in stronger prices for gold and silver. We also like platinum. Palladium, we don't see necessarily falling, but it's already very high. We do think the scope for platinum prices to rise is there. And we've seen the platinum price over the last few days starting to try to break out of that $800 to $1,000 range that it has maintained for several years now. We've seen it break out only to fall back in the past. It remains to be seen if platinum will continue to rise and stay above $1,000. If it does, you could see much stronger investment demand pushing the platinum price higher in 2021. So that's where we are on the 11th of December. We'll probably do another one of these next weekend before taking a break for the year end and trying to regain our composure for the new year to come. Thank you and have a good weekend. Stay safe, stay clean, stay away from other people. Goodbye.